The steam whistle pierced the crisp Oregon air, signaling the train's arrival at Silver Creek Station. Eleanor Morgan gripped her weathered leather suitcase tightly, her knuckles white with anticipation. At 6 feet tall, she towered over most. Men back home in Boston, a fact that had earned her sidelong glances and whispered comments throughout her 38 years. But here, in this remote logging town nestled against the majestic Douglas firs, she hoped to find acceptance, belonging, and perhaps even love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The letter tucked inside her coat pocket had promised all three. For 6 months, she had exchanged correspondence with William Prescott, owner of a modest sawmill who sought a wife with practical sensibilities and a nurturing spirit. His words had been kind, his penmanship neat and deliberate. He hadn't asked about her height. She hadn't volunteered the information. Now, as the train hissed to a stop, Eleanor smoothed down her best dress, a forest green wool garment she'd sewn herself, and took a deep breath. This was her chance for a new beginning. The platform at Silver Creek Station was little more than weathered planks nailed together, dotted with puddles from the morning's rain. Eleanor stepped down carefully, her height making the descent from the train car precarious. She adjusted her hat, a modest brown creation with a single pheasant feather, and surveyed her surroundings. Silver Creek appeared to be exactly what William had described in his letters, a frontier town carved from wilderness with a main street, lined by a general store, post office, 2 saloons, and a small white church whose steeple needed fresh paint. The air smelled of pine sap, wet earth, and the distant scent of burning wood. The late afternoon sun filtered through clouds, casting long shadows across the muddy street. A small group of loggers stood outside the nearest saloon, their woolen shirts stained with sweat and sawdust. Their conversation halted as they noticed Eleanor, eyes widening at her imposing figure. She stood taller than every man on that porch, a fact that had haunted her throughout her life. "Miss Morgan?" A voice called from behind her. Eleanor turned, heart racing. A man approached, removing his hat as he drew near. He was handsome in a weathered way, with sandy hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His shoulders were broad, his stance confident, but he barely reached her chin. "Mr. Prescott?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man nodded, his smile faltering as he looked up, truly up, at her face. "William Prescott, yes." His eyes traveled from her face to her shoulders, then down to her feet and back again, taking measure of her considerable height. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Eleanor said, extending her gloved hand. "I've looked forward to this day for months." William took her hand, but his grip was limp, his smile now completely gone. "You didn't mention," he began, then cleared his throat. "In your letters, you failed to disclose certain attributes." The loggers at the saloon had fallen silent, watching the exchange with unconcealed interest. Eleanor felt heat rise to her face. "My height," she said plainly. "No, I didn't mention it." "You're taller than me," William said, stating the obvious as if it were an accusation. "Yes," Eleanor replied, straightening her spine even further. "I am." William stepped back, creating distance between them. "Miss Morgan, I don't mean to be unkind, but this simply won't work. I need a wife who," he gestured vaguely at her towering form, "who fits the role." "The role," Eleanor repeated, her throat tightening. "A woman should look up to her husband," William said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Not the other way around. What would people think? I have a position in this community to maintain." Behind them, one of the loggers let out a low whistle. Another snickered. Eleanor felt as if she were back in Boston, 13 years old again, hunched over in a futile attempt to diminish her presence. "You wrote that you wanted a partner," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "Someone to help build your life here." "I wanted a normal woman," William replied, then winced at his own words. I mean, a woman of ordinary stature. This arrangement, it simply won't do. Eleanor stood frozen, the weight of his rejection crushing her more thoroughly than the weight of her heavy travelling clothes. She had sold her small inheritance, quit her position as a seamstress, and travelled thousands of miles based on the promises in his letters. And now, within minutes of meeting her, William Prescott had deemed her unacceptable. I'll arrange for your return passage, he said, not meeting her eyes. The eastbound train comes through tomorrow morning. I spent everything I had to get here, Eleanor said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions within. I have no home to return to. William shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, but I simply can't be seen. With a wife who makes you look small, Eleanor finished for him. A lifetime of similar rejections had taught her to recognize the unspoken truth. William had the decency to look ashamed, but not enough to reconsider. He placed his hat back on his head, tipped it awkwardly, and turned away. I truly am sorry, he said over his shoulder, then walked quickly toward the general store, leaving Eleanor alone on the platform with her suitcase and shattered hopes. The loggers at the saloon were openly staring now. One of them called out, "Need help with that bag, ma'am? Looks mighty small in your hands." Laughter followed, cruel and cutting. Eleanor gripped her suitcase tighter and stepped off the platform, her boots sinking slightly into the mud of Silver Creek's main street. She had no destination, no plan, but she walked with purpose nonetheless, head high despite the burning humiliation. She had endured worse. She would endure this. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the town. Eleanor walked past the general store, the saloons, the church, and continued to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to towering pines. She needed to think, to plan her next move. Going back east wasn't an option. She had burned those bridges, sold her meager possessions, and bid farewell to the few friends she had. Moving forward was her only choice, but toward what? She found a fallen log at the forest's edge and sat down, placing her suitcase beside her. The distant sound of axes and saws echoed from deeper in the woods as logging crews finished their day's work. Eleanor rubbed her temples, trying to suppress the headache that threatened to overwhelm her. "Quite a view from up here, isn't it?" a deep voice said. Eleanor startled, turning to find a man standing a few yards away. He was tall, taller than her by at least 3 inches, with broad shoulders and powerful arms exposed by rolled-up shirt sleeves. His face was partly obscured by a thick beard, but she could see bright blue eyes studying her with curiosity rather than judgment. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said, keeping his distance. "Name's Gabriel Blackwood. I run the Northern Logging, a camp for evergreen timber." Eleanor hesitated, then replied, "Eleanor Morgan." "You're new to Silver Creek?" Gabriel observed. "Just arrived on today's train?" "Yes." She didn't elaborate. Gabriel nodded toward the town. "And judging by your current location and expression, I'm guessing William Prescott isn't what you expected." Eleanor's head snapped up. "You know about that?" "Small town," Gabriel shrugged. "Word travels fast, especially when half the logging crew is taking a break at the saloon. Prescott's been telling everyone for weeks that his mail-order bride was arriving today." "Former mail-order bride," Eleanor corrected bitterly. "The arrangement has been dissolved." Gabriel's expression darkened. "Because of your height." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. "Prescott's a fool," Gabriel said simply. "Always has been. Cares more about appearances than substance." Eleanor studied the man before her. Unlike William, Gabriel Blackwood seemed entirely comfortable with her height. His posture was relaxed, his gaze direct. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight, Miss Morgan?" he asked. Eleanor glanced at the darkening sky. "I haven't figured that out yet. There's a boarding house run by Martha Webb. Good woman, fair prices. I can show you the way." Eleanor hesitated. She had just been betrayed by one stranger. Trusting another seemed unwise, yet there was something about Gabriel's straightforward manner that put her at ease. "Why would you help me?" she asked directly. Gabriel considered the question. "Because I've seen how this town treats outsiders, who don't fit their narrow expectations, because no one should be left stranded at nightfall, and because I believe people deserve better than to be judged by something as meaningless as how high their eyes sit from the ground." His answer was so unexpected, so refreshingly honest, that Eleanor found herself smiling for the first time. "Since arriving in Silver Creek, I would appreciate your guidance to the boarding house," she said, rising to her full height. Gabriel didn't flinch or step back. Instead, he smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Mrs. Webb's cooking is worth the price alone," he said, gesturing toward town, "and she doesn't gossip, which in Silver Creek is rarer than gold." As they walked back toward town, Eleanor felt the stares of townspeople, but with Gabriel beside her, the look seemed less hostile, more curious. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed to deflect criticism. "The logging business must be prosperous," Eleanor commented, noticing the activity around the sawmill. "It is," Gabriel replied. "Oregon timber is some of the finest in the world. We're shipping lumber all along the coast and even to the east. The railroad made everything possible." "The same railroad that brought me here," Eleanor mused. Gabriel glanced at her. "Do you regret coming?" The question caught her off guard. Did she regret it? She had gambled everything on William's promises, only to be rejected within minutes of arriving. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "Ask me tomorrow." Gabriel nodded, respecting her uncertainty. They arrived at a 2-story white house, with blue shutters and a small sign that read, "Webb's Boarding House." A plump woman with silver-streaked hair was sweeping the porch. "Evening, Mrs. Webb," Gabriel called. "I've brought you a new guest." Martha Webb looked up, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Eleanor's height, but her warm smile never faltered. "Well now, we don't often get newcomers this time of year. Come in, dear. You look exhausted." Eleanor turned to Gabriel. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Blackwood." "Gabriel," he corrected, "and it was no trouble. I'm heading back to the northern camp tomorrow, but perhaps we'll cross paths again." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, finding herself hoping it would be true. Martha Webb ushered Eleanor inside, and Gabriel continued down the street, his tall figure silhouetted against the last light of day. The boarding house was clean and modestly furnished. Martha showed Eleanor to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. The bed was too short, as all beds were for her, but the mattress was soft and the linens fresh. "Supper's in half an hour," Martha said. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot and plentiful." "Thank you," Eleanor replied. "Mr. Blackwood mentioned your cooking. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Martha smiled. "Gabriel's a good man. Been running that northern camp for 5 years. Now turned it from the most dangerous operation in the county to the safest and most productive. He's got a good head on his shoulders, that one." After Martha left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The tears came quietly, a release of tension and disappointment. She had been so certain that William was different, that his letters, so thoughtful and kind, reflected a man who would see beyond her physical appearance. Once the tears subsided, Eleanor washed her face in the basin provided and changed into a clean blouse. She would not hide in her room feeling sorry for herself. If Silver Creek was to be her home, at least for now, she would face it with dignity. The dining room downstairs held 3 other boarders, an elderly school teacher, a young clerk from the general store, and a middle-aged widow who worked at the post office. All 3 stared when Eleanor entered, But Martha quickly made introductions, and the conversation flowed naturally as they ate a hearty meal of venison stew, cornbread, and apple pie. "You're a seamstress, you say?" Martha asked as they finished. "Dinner. Well, that's fortunate. Silver Creek could use a good seamstress. Mrs. Peterson does what she can, but her eyesight isn't what it was." "I specialize in practical garments," Eleanor explained. "Work clothes, sturdy dresses, children's clothing that can withstand play." "Perfect for a logging town." The widow, Mrs. Collins, nodded approvingly. "Most folks here value function over fashion." "Except William Prescott," the young clerk muttered, then flushed when he realized he'd spoken aloud. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. "Word travels fast," Eleanor said dryly. Martha reached over and patted her hand. "People will talk." "Dear, it's what they do in small towns, but they'll also forget quickly when the next bit of gossip comes along. Or when they need a dress mended or trousers let out," Mrs. Collins added with a wink. After dinner, Eleanor helped Martha clear the dishes, grateful for the simple normalcy of the task. The kindness shown by Martha and Gabriel had begun to restore her faith that perhaps Silver Creek might still offer her a chance at belonging. Later, as she lay in bed listening to the distant hooting of an owl, Eleanor thought of Gabriel Blackwood, a man who seemed utterly unconcerned by her height, who had treated her with respect when others had not. His northern logging camp was mentioned with respect by the diners, and Martha clearly thought highly of him. Perhaps tomorrow would bring clarity. Perhaps Silver Creek still held promise, just not in the way she had expected. With that thought, Eleanor closed her eyes and fell into an exhausted sleep, her first night in Oregon coming to a close, not with the romantic reunion she had imagined, but with the tentative hope that sometimes rejection could lead to unexpected paths. And in the darkness of the forest beyond town, Gabriel Blackwood sat by his campfire, thinking of the tall woman with the dignified bearing and wondering what twist of fate had brought her to this remote corner of Oregon. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Eleanor's room at Webb's boarding house. She had slept better than expected, exhaustion overcoming her troubled thoughts. Now, as she pinned her chestnut hair into a practical bun, she assessed her situation with clear eyes. She had exactly $28 to her name, her sewing supplies, 2 changes of clothes, and no return ticket to Boston, the eastbound. Train was scheduled to depart in 3 hours, but Eleanor had already decided she wouldn't be on it. Pride played a part in that decision, but practicality drove it. She had skills, she had determination. And Silver Creek, despite its less than welcoming introduction, needed a seamstress. Downstairs, Martha Webb was already busy with breakfast preparations. The scent of frying bacon and fresh coffee filled the house, making Eleanor realize how hungry she was. "There you are," Martha said warmly. "Sleep well?" "Better than expected," Eleanor admitted, automatically ducking slightly as she entered the kitchen. Years of hitting her head on door frames had taught her caution. Martha noticed and frowned slightly. "You needn't stoop here, dear. My late husband was 6'4", had all the door frames raised when we built this place. Said he was tired of walking around with perpetual bruises on his forehead." Eleanor straightened, surprised and grateful. "That's unusually considerate." "Frank was an unusually considerate man," Martha replied with a sad smile. 20 years gone now, but I keep the door frames high. Never know when another tall person might need somewhere to stand straight." The simple kindness nearly brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. She composed herself and asked, "Is there anything I can help with?" "You can slice that bread while I finish these eggs. Then we need to talk about your plans." As they worked side by side preparing breakfast, Eleanor explained her decision to stay in Silver Creek, at least temporarily. "I have skills that could be useful here. I can earn my keep." Martha nodded approvingly. The small room off the back porch was my sewing room years ago. It gets good light most of the day. You're welcome to use it until you get established. I couldn't impose. Nonsense. It's sitting empty, gathering dust. Besides, Martha added with a twinkle in her eye, my winter coat needs mending, and I never did have the patience for fine stitch work. By mid-morning, Eleanor had transformed the small back room into a workable sewing space. Martha had spread word among her friends that a skilled seamstress was available for work, and already 3 women had stopped by to inquire about having dresses altered or mended. Eleanor was measuring curtain fabric when a shadow darkened the doorway. She looked up to see Gabriel Blackwood filling the frame, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, surprised. "Gabriel," he corrected again, his voice as deep and resonant as she remembered. "Mrs. Webb said I might find you here." Eleanor set down her measuring tape. "I thought you were returning to your logging camp today?" "I am. Heading there now, in fact." He shifted slightly, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I came to see if you were on the eastbound train." "I'm not going back," Eleanor said firmly. "Gabriel's." Chase broke into a smile that transformed his weathered features. "Good. Silver Creek could use more people who don't run at the first sign of trouble. Or rejection," she added wryly. "Especially that." He paused, then continued, "The northern camp is short on clothing repairs. Loggers are hard on their gear, and no one up there can stitch worth a damn. Would you be interested in taking on some work? It would be a regular income." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "You came all this way to offer me business?" "Partly," Gabriel admitted, "and partly to make sure you were all right after yesterday." His honesty was refreshing. "That's very considerate of you." "Not really. I need a good seamstress, and you need work. Seems like a fair arrangement." Eleanor smiled at his practical approach. "When would you need the first repairs done?" "I'll have one of my men bring a batch down next week. The pay is fair, better than what most in town would offer." "Then we have an arrangement," Eleanor agreed, feeling a small but significant victory. Within 24 hours of being rejected by William Prescott, she had secured lodging and a steady source of income. Gabriel nodded, seeming pleased. "I should warn you, though, some of these clothes might need more than repair, might need an exorcism." The unexpected joke startled a laugh from Eleanor. It felt good to laugh after yesterday's humiliation. Gabriel replaced his hat and turned. To leave, then paused. "There's a social at the church next Saturday. Whole town comes. Good way to meet folks who might need your services." "Will you be there?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. "I don't usually attend town gatherings," he replied, his expression unreadable. "Loggers' hours don't mix well with socializing." "I understand," Eleanor said, trying to hide her disappointment. Gabriel tipped his hat and left, his tall frame disappearing around the corner. Eleanor returned to her measuring, but her mind kept wandering to the forthright lumberjack, who seemed to see her height as an attribute rather than a flaw. The week passed quickly as Eleanor established her sewing business. Word spread through town that her work was precise and durable. Women brought dresses to be altered, men brought work shirts with torn sleeves, and mothers brought children's clothes that needed letting out. Not everyone was welcoming. Some women whispered behind their hands when Eleanor walked down the street. A group of men outside the saloon sometimes called out comments about the giant spinster, and William Prescott carefully avoided her, crossing to the other side of the street if he saw her approaching, but for every unkind word or look, there seemed to be someone else in Silver Creek who judged her by her work rather than her stature. Mrs. Peterson, whose failing eyesight had forced her to give up most sewing work, became a regular visitor, sharing patterns and techniques. The blacksmith ordered 3 new work shirts, saying his wife had pronounced Eleanor's stitching stronger than most men's handshakes. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a crisp autumn breeze. Eleanor had completed her first batch. of repairs for the northern logging camp, a pile of torn shirts, split-seam trousers, and socks with holes big enough to pass a fist through. The logger who came to collect them whistled appreciatively at her work. "Ain't seen stitching this. Fine since my grandmother passed," he said, running a calloused thumb over a nearly invisible seam repair. "Mr. Blackwood was right about you." "Mr. Blackwood recommended me," Eleanor asked, surprised. "Said you were the best seamstress this side of Portland. Also said to anyone who gives you trouble answers to him." The logger grinned. "Not that many. Would cross the boss. Men have arms like tree trunks and a temper when roused." Eleanor felt a strange warmth at the thought of Gabriel defending her reputation. She had thought of him often during the week, wondering about his life at the logging camp and whether he truly saw her as she hoped, as a woman of value, not just a curiosity. That evening, Eleanor dressed for the church social with special care. Her best dress, a deep burgundy wool with modest lace at the collar, had been carefully pressed. She pinned her hair up, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. It had been years since she'd bothered with such feminine touches. In Boston, she had eventually accepted that her height made her an unlikely romantic prospect and had focused instead on her independence. But tonight, walking toward the church where lanterns lit the path and fiddle music already spilled from the open doors, Eleanor allowed herself to hope that Silver Creek might offer something more than just a fresh start for her business. The church hall was decorated with autumn leaves and candles. Tables lined the walls, laden with pies, cakes, and savory dishes, brought by the townspeople. Children ran between the adults, playing tag, while their parents chatted in groups. Eleanor entered alone, immediately conscious of how she stood out, literally, above the crowd. Several people nodded politely. Some of her customers smiled and waved, but others stared openly or whispered behind their hands. Martha Webb appeared at her side, resplendent in a blue dress that brought out her eyes. "Don't mind them," she said, quietly. "Half the town still gossips about me taking in boarders after Frank died, rather than remarrying. People fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand me," Eleanor concluded. "They don't understand anyone who doesn't fit their narrow view of how things should be," Martha corrected. "Come, I'll introduce you to some folks worth knowing." For the next hour, Eleanor circulated under Martha's guidance, meeting the doctor and his wife, the school teacher, and several families who had been in Silver Creek since its founding. Some were openly curious about her height, asking direct questions that bordered on rude, but Eleanor had long ago learned to answer with grace rather than offense. "Yes, I can reach the top shelf without a stool. No, I don't play basketball. It wasn't encouraged for ladies when I was growing up. Yes, my parents were of average height. Sometimes nature has its own ideas." She was sampling a slice of apple pie when a hush fell over one side of the room. Eleanor turned to see what had caused the sudden quiet and nearly dropped her plate. Gabriel Blackwood stood in the doorway, looking distinctly uncomfortable in clean trousers and a pressed shirt. His beard had been trimmed, his hair combed back, but nothing could diminish the raw power of his presence. Beside her, Martha gasped softly. "Well, I'll be," the older woman murmured. "Gabriel hasn't attended a town gathering in 3 years, not since the incident." "Incident?" Eleanor asked, but Martha was already moving away to greet a newcomer. Gabriel's eyes scanned the room until they found Eleanor. His shoulders seemed to relax slightly, and he made his way toward her, nodding curtly to those who greeted him, but not stopping to chat. "Miss Morgan," he said when he reached her side, "you look well." "As do you," she replied, suddenly feeling shy. "I didn't expect to see you here." Gabriel accepted a cup of cider from a passing server. "I decided a night away from camp might be beneficial." "And is it? Beneficial?" His eyes met hers, direct and unwavering. "It's improving by the minute." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. At the simple compliment, before she could respond, Reverend Taylor approached them, beaming. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure to have you join us tonight. And Miss Morgan, how wonderful to see you settling into our community." Eleanor had met the Reverend earlier in the week when he brought in his Sunday coat for mending. He was a kind man with a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Reverend," she replied. "Everyone has been very welcoming." "Most everyone," Gabriel amended quietly. The Reverend's smile dimmed slightly. "Ah, yes. I heard about the misunderstanding with Mr. Prescott. Most unfortunate." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Gabriel said flatly. "It was poor judgment on his part." "Perhaps," the Reverend conceded, "but God often works in mysterious ways. What seems like rejection can sometimes be divine redirection." Eleanor wasn't sure. She believed in divine redirection, but she had to admit that William's rejection had led her to find her own place in Silver Creek, rather than becoming someone's wife. There was value in that independence, even if it came with loneliness. "The music's starting up again," Gabriel observed, as the fiddler returned to his position at the front of the hall. "Would you care to dance, Miss Morgan?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. She hadn't danced in years. Most men found the prospect of partnering with a woman of her height intimidating. "I'm rather out of practice," she hedged. "As am I," Gabriel replied. "We can be clumsy together." His honesty made her smile. "Very. Well, but don't say I didn't warn you." They moved to the dance floor as the fiddler struck up a lively reel. Gabriel's hand at her waist was steady, his grip firm but gentle. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor didn't have to look down at her dance partner. Their eyes were nearly level, perhaps an inch or two higher. "You're staring," Gabriel commented, as they turned with the music. "I apologize," Eleanor said quickly. "It's just, I've never danced with someone taller than myself before." Gabriel's expression softened. "And I've rarely danced with someone I didn't have to bend in half to hold. We make a good match." The words, "good match," lingered in the air between them as they moved through the steps of the dance. Eleanor was conscious of the stares they attracted. The town's newest oddity and its most reclusive resident, both standing head and shoulders above the crowd. But for once, she didn't care about the stares. Dancing with Gabriel felt right in a way few things had in her life. When the music ended, she was almost disappointed. Gabriel led her to the refreshment table and handed her a cup of punch. "You dance well for someone out of practice," he commented. "As do you for a man who spends his days among trees rather than people." A shadow crossed his face. "I prefer trees. They don't judge, don't gossip, don't betray." The bitterness in his voice surprised her. "You've had experience with all three, I take it." Gabriel seemed to realize he'd revealed more than intended. "Another story for another time." He glanced around the room. "Town events were never my favorite, even before the incident Martha mentioned." Eleanor asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "People talk too much." "They do," she agreed, "but sometimes talking helps understand." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the church's side door. "I need air. Would you walk with me?" The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. They strolled along the church's garden path, the music and chatter from inside fading to a distant murmur. 3 years ago," Gabriel began without preamble, "I was engaged to Mary Simmons, the doctor's niece. She came to Silver Creek to help in his practice." Eleanor listened silently, sensing he needed to tell this story at his own pace. "Mary was everything I thought I wanted. Educated, gentle, beautiful, but he hesitated. She struggled with my work, my manners, my lack of formal education. She wanted to change me into someone more suitable for town life." "Did you love her?" Eleanor asked softly. "I thought so, but love doesn't demand transformation. I understand that now." Gabriel stopped walking and turned to face Eleanor. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found her with William Prescott. Eleanor's breath caught. Oh, not like that, Gabriel clarified. They were just talking, but I overheard enough. She was questioning her choice, lamenting being tied to a rough lumberjack when she could have a businessman who understood proper society. Prescott was encouraging her doubts. What did you do? Nothing dramatic. I simply walked away, sent her a note ending our engagement the next day. She left town within a week. Gabriel's voice was flat, emotionless. Prescott spread rumors that I'd threatened them both, that Mary fled in fear. Most knew it wasn't true, but some believed it. I stopped coming to town except when necessary. Eleanor felt a surge of anger toward William Prescott. The man seemed determined to judge others while hiding his own flaws. I'm sorry, she said. Simply, Gabriel shrugged. It taught me something important. What's that? That appearance is deceiving, that someone beautiful on the outside can be ugly within, and conversely. His eyes met hers, intense in the moonlight. That true beauty often isn't recognized because people are too blinded by convention to see it. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Eleanor felt understood in a way she never had before. The church door opened nearby, spilling light and noise into the garden. The spell broken, Gabriel stepped back slightly. We should return before they send out a search party, he said with a small smile. Small towns love nothing more than fresh gossip. Let them talk, Eleanor replied boldly. I've been gossip fodder. Since I was 12 years old and first towered over my teacher, it loses its sting eventually. Gabriel offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength beneath his sleeve. As they walked back toward the church, Eleanor realized that for the first time in her life, she felt perfectly sized, neither too tall nor too awkward, but exactly as she was meant to be. Inside, the dancing continued, but something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. Eleanor noticed William Prescott standing with a group of businessmen, his expression darkening as he watched her enter on Gabriel's arm. He whispered something to his companions, who glanced her way with smirks. Ignore him, Gabriel murmured, following her gaze. I intend to, Eleanor replied. His opinion matters less to me with each passing day. They rejoined the festivities, dancing twice more before Gabriel announced he needed to return to camp before dawn. He walked Eleanor back to the boarding house, their path lit by moonlight and the occasional lantern hanging outside businesses. Thank you for attending tonight, Eleanor said as they reached Martha's front gate. I know it wasn't easy for you. Things are worth the discomfort, Gabriel replied. He hesitated, then added, I'll be bringing some men to town next Saturday for supplies. Perhaps you might join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant. The invitation was unexpected, but not unwelcome. I'd like that, Eleanor said, surprised by how much she meant it. Until then, Gabriel tipped his hat and turned to leave. Gabriel, Eleanor called after him. He looked back, questioning. Why did you really come tonight? He considered her question seriously before answering. Because when I saw you standing tall despite everything Prescott did, I remembered what courage looks like, and I wanted to see it again. With that, he walked away into the night, leaving Eleanor to ponder how one day's devastating rejection had somehow led her to this moment, standing under the stars, feeling valued not despite her differences, but because of them. The following week brought a crisp turn in the weather as October settled firmly over Silver Creek. Mornings dawned with frost on the window panes, and the surrounding evergreens stood in sharp relief against skies that promised snow before long. Eleanor's sewing business flourished beyond her expectations. What had begun as simple mending jobs expanded as word of her skills spread through town and to the outlying homesteads. Women brought her fabric to craft winter dresses and coats. The owner of the general store commissioned a dozen heavy canvas aprons for his staff. Even the saloon proprietor ordered new curtains for his establishment, claiming, "The ladies' stitches are straight as rifle shots." Her work for Gabriel's logging camp proved most lucrative of all. The first batch of repairs had been so satisfactory that he'd sent a larger second order, along with a note. "Miss Morgan, your work exceeds expectations. The men insist their clothes haven't been this well mended since their mothers did the stitching. Enclosed is payment for your services and a second shipment of garments requiring your attention. Your skills are appreciated. Regards, G. Blackwood." The note, written in a surprisingly elegant hand, had been tucked inside an envelope containing payment well above what Eleanor had expected. She found herself reading it several times, noting the formal tone but sincere appreciation. She wondered if Gabriel was equally reserved in his correspondence with everyone, or if this professional distance was specific to their interaction. Martha had noticed her interest in the note. "You've read that scrap of paper so many times, I'm surprised it hasn't worn through," she commented over breakfast. Eleanor tucked the note into her pocket, feeling oddly defensive. "Mr. Blackwood is simply a valued customer. And a good man," Martha added with a knowing smile, "one of the few in these parts who measures others by their character rather than appearances." "We share that perspective," Eleanor agreed cautiously. "A solid foundation for friendship," Martha said, emphasizing the last word just enough to make Eleanor blush. "Or whatever else might grow from it." The possibility of whatever else occupied Eleanor's thoughts throughout the week as she prepared for Saturday's dinner with Gabriel. She had not had a proper courtship since her early 20s, when Richard Holloway had pursued her briefly before deciding her height made her too intimidating for a proper wife. The memory still stung, but less sharply now than it once had, was Gabriel courting her. The dinner invitation suggested interest beyond friendship, but Eleanor was wary of reading too much into it. Men and women could share a meal without romantic implications. Perhaps he simply enjoyed her company as someone who, like him, stood apart from the crowd, literally and figuratively. By Saturday afternoon, Eleanor's nervousness had reached a peak. She tried on 3 different dresses before settling on a deep forest green wool with subtle copper embroidery at the collar and cuffs, her own handiwork from last winter when Boston's long evenings had left her with time for personal projects. The hotel restaurant occupied the ground floor of Silver Creek's only 2-story commercial building. Its large windows overlooked the main street, and white tablecloths covered round tables spaced for privacy. It was the closest thing to fine dining the logging town could offer. Eleanor arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, trying to ignore the stares. Of those already seated, she stood taller than usual, refusing to stoop or shrink herself to avoid attention. A lesson learned from Gabriel, perhaps, that dignity didn't require conformity. Gabriel was already waiting, standing as she approached. He wore a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders surprisingly well, his beard neatly trimmed, hair combed back from his forehead. He looked both uncomfortable in the formal attire and undeniably handsome. "You look beautiful," he said simply as she reached the table. The directness of the compliment caught Eleanor off guard. "Thank you. You look quite distinguished yourself." "Distinguished is one word for it," he replied with a wry smile, tugging slightly at his collar. "Confined might be another. But some occasions merit discomfort." "And this is such an occasion?" she asked, taking her seat. "Dining with a beautiful woman always is." His eyes held hers for a moment. Then he reached for the water glass, seemingly embarrassed by his own forthrightness. The waiter approached with menus, his professional demeanor slipping momentarily as he registered the unusual height of both. Diners. Eleanor pretended not to notice, having long ago learned to ignore such reactions. "The trout is fresh today," Gabriel recommended after the waiter departed. "Caught this morning in Copper Creek. You seem knowledgeable about the menu." "I helped build this place 6 years ago when Silver Creek was hardly more than a collection," Of tents. The owner lets me know what's good when I come to town. He glanced around the room. It's not Boston dining, I'm sure. Boston dining is overrated, Eleanor replied, more concerned with appearance than substance. Like Boston men? Gabriel asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Eleanor considered the question. Some, many perhaps. They value convention above all else. And what do you value, Eleanor Morgan? The question was soft but direct, his blue eyes intent on her face. The use of her first name felt intimate in a way that sent warmth through her chest. Honesty, she answered after a moment. Integrity, the courage to stand apart when necessary. Even when standing apart brings pain? Especially then. She met his gaze steadily. And you? What does Gabriel Blackwood value? Strength, he replied without hesitation. Not just of body, but of character, loyalty, and the wisdom to recognize worth where others see only difference. Their conversation was interrupted by the waiter's return. They ordered trout for both, and fell into easier discussion about Eleanor's growing business and the challenges of managing a logging operation as winter approached. The men respect you, Eleanor observed. The loggers who come to town speak of you with high regard. Gabriel shrugged. I work alongside them, not above them. I know every job in camp because I've done every job in camp. Makes it harder for a man to complain about dangerous conditions when his foreman is standing in the same mud. Is it very dangerous? Logging? A shadow crossed his face. Lost 2 men last winter. One to a falling limb, another to infection after a minor injury. Logging takes more lives than mining in these parts, but people notice it less because we die one at a time, not in dramatic collapses. The gravity in his voice revealed a man who carried the weight of responsibility heavily. Eleanor found herself reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. I'm sorry, she said. That must be a terrible burden. He looked at her hand on his, then at her face, surprise evident in his expression. Most women don't want to hear about the realities of timber work. I'm not most women, Eleanor replied, withdrawing her hand. No, Gabriel agreed, his voice softer. You certainly are not. Their meal arrived, perfectly prepared trout with seasonal vegetables and fresh bread. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Gabriel spoke again. I have a proposal for you, he said, setting down his fork. A business proposal, he clarified quickly, noting her startled expression. I'm listening, Eleanor replied. Curious, the northern camp needs winter gear, heavy coats, gloves, scarves. The company usually orders from Portland, but delivery is unreliable, especially once snow blocks the mountain passes. He paused. I'd like to commission you to make them instead. Fair payment, of course. Eleanor considered the offer. It would be her largest commission yet, requiring significant work, but offering financial security through the winter months. I'd need to purchase additional materials, she said, thinking practically, and time would be a factor. When would you need them completed? Within a month before the heavy snows. As for materials, Gabriel reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. This advance should cover your costs. 30 men in camp, each needing a full set of winter gear. Eleanor opened the envelope and nearly gasped at the sum inside. It was more money than she'd seen at once in years. This is very generous, she said carefully. It's fair, Gabriel corrected. Quality work deserves quality pay. Their eyes met, and Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude not just for the commission, but for his recognition of her value. William Prescott had dismissed her because of her height. Gabriel seemed to value her precisely because she stood tall in all ways. I accept, she said, extending her hand to seal the agreement. Gabriel took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. The handshake lasted a moment longer than necessary, neither quite willing to break the connection. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly, their conversation touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, and the peculiarities of small-town life. Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn to Gabriel's dry humor and insightful observations. As they left the restaurant, the night air was crisp, stars sharp and clear overhead. Gabriel offered his arm, and Eleanor took it, feeling the solid strength beneath her hand. "I'll walk you home," he said. It wasn't a question, but a simple statement of intent. They strolled slowly through Silver Creek's quiet streets, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. Eleanor was acutely aware of the warmth where their bodies touched, of the curious glances from those they passed, of the perfect rightness of walking beside someone who matched her stride for stride. "Eleanor," Gabriel began, his voice serious. "I should tell you—" He was interrupted by a sharp call from across the street. "Well, if it isn't the giant and the beast!" William Prescott's voice carried clearly in the night air. He stood outside the saloon with two companions, his posture suggesting he'd been drinking. Gabriel stiffened beside her. "Ignore him," he muttered. But William was already crossing the street, his companions following reluctantly behind. "Quite a sight, you two," he continued, his words slightly slurred. "The town freak and the mountain hermit. Perfectly matched." Eleanor felt Gabriel's arm tense under her hand. "Mr. Prescott," she said coolly, "I believe you've had enough for one evening." "And I believe you've forgotten your place," William retorted, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Coming to town, setting up shop, parading around with him." He jerked his head toward Gabriel. "Did he tell you about Mary? About how he threatened her when she saw sense?" "I know the truth," Eleanor replied evenly. "Unlike you, Mr. Prescott, I don't base my opinions on gossip." William's face darkened. "You think you're so superior, don't you? With your fancy Eastern manners and your freakish height. You're nothing but a curiosity here, a story to tell. Remember that giant woman who came to marry Prescott? That's all you'll ever be." Gabriel moved forward, but Eleanor held him back with gentle pressure on his arm. This was her battle. "Is that what bothers you most, Mr. Prescott? That I found my place here despite your rejection? Or that others see value in me where you see only my height?" She straightened to her full 6 feet, looking down at William both literally and figuratively. "I pity you, so concerned with appearances that you've mistaken them for substance." William's mouth opened and closed, his anger momentarily robbed of words. One of his companions tugged at his sleeve. "Come on, Will, let's go. You've had enough." For a moment, Eleanor thought William might lunge at them, his face contorted with humiliation and rage. But then he spat on the ground near her feet and turned away. "You deserve each other," he called over his shoulder. "The freak and the failure." They watched him swagger back to the saloon, his companions casting apologetic glances behind them. "I'm sorry," Gabriel said quietly once William was out of earshot. "For what?" Eleanor asked. "His behavior is not your responsibility." "No, but I'm sorry you had to face it, that my presence beside you invited it." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Listen to me, Gabriel Blackwood. I have been facing men like William Prescott my entire life, men who see only what's different, never what's valuable. I don't regret being seen with you. I'm proud of it." Something in Gabriel's expression shifted, softened. He reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You are remarkable, Eleanor Morgan." The touch of his fingers against her cheek was gentle, almost reverent. Eleanor felt her heart quicken, aware they stood in the middle of the street where anyone might see, but finding she didn't care. "What were you going to tell me?" she asked softly. Before we were interrupted, Gabriel hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "That I find myself thinking of you at odd moments, when the sun hits the treetops in the morning, when an eagle soars overhead, when something makes me laugh." He paused. "That I'd like to see you again, not just as a business associate." The simple honesty of his declaration took her breath away. "I'd like that too," she replied. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could walk by the creek, if the weather holds." "I'd enjoy that." They continued walking toward the boarding house, the tension of the encounter with William gradually easing. At Martha's gate, they paused. Gabriel took both of Eleanor's hands in his. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For standing tall. For reminding me that there's more to life than hiding in the woods with my regrets." Eleanor smiled at his choice of words. "Standing tall is something I can't help," she quipped. Gabriel's laugh was low and warm. "Good night, Eleanor. Until tomorrow." "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching as he walked away, his tall figure gradually blending into the darkness. Inside, Martha was waiting up, pretending to read by the fire. "Had a pleasant evening, did you?" she asked innocently. "Very pleasant," Eleanor replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "And will there be more pleasant evenings?" "I believe so." Eleanor hung her shawl by the door, though not everyone in town approves. Martha snorted. "William Prescott, I presume. That man has been a thorn in decent folks' sides since he arrived with his fancy clothes and Eastern money. Thinks he owns Silver Creek because he bought the sawmill. He seems to hold particular animosity toward Gabriel, because Gabriel is everything William pretends to be: honest, hard-working, respected." Martha closed her book decisively. "Don't. You worry about William Prescott. Men like him always overreach eventually." Eleanor nodded, though she couldn't quite dismiss the unease left by the encounter. Something in William's eyes had suggested his resentment went deeper than mere dislike, bordering on true hatred. "Gabriel is coming to call tomorrow," she said, changing the subject. Martha's eyes brightened. "Is he now? Well, isn't that something? That man hasn't courted anyone since—" She stopped herself. "Since Mary," Eleanor finished quietly. "He told me about her." "Did he?" Martha looked genuinely surprised. "Gabriel Blackwood must think very highly of you indeed. He doesn't speak of that time to anyone." She studied Eleanor's face. "Be gentle with him, dear. His heart healed crooked. After Mary, like a bone set wrong. I would never hurt him," Eleanor said, surprised by the fierceness of her own conviction. "Not intentionally, no, but sometimes even the kindest hearts cause pain when expectations don't align." Martha's eyes were sympathetic but direct. "What are your intentions toward Gabriel?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. I hardly... No, we've only just begun to know each other." "But you care for him," Martha pressed. "Yes," Eleanor admitted, "more than I expected to, and sooner." "Then that's enough for now." Martha rose, patting Eleanor's hand. "The rest will sort itself out in time. Just remember, in a town this small, every step you take together will be watched and judged." "I've been watched and judged my entire life," Eleanor replied with a rueful smile. "At least now I have something worth their scrutiny." That night, as she prepared for bed, Eleanor found herself wondering at the swift turn her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, she had arrived in Silver Creek, expecting to become William Prescott's wife. Now she had her own business, growing respect in the community, and the attention of a man whose quiet strength and integrity impressed her more with each encounter. The irony wasn't lost on her. William's rejection, painful as it had been, had pushed her toward independence. That independence had allowed her to meet Gabriel as an equal, not as a woman desperate for security. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor felt truly seen, not as a curiosity, not as an oddity, but as a woman of worth. The journey had been difficult, but standing at her window, looking out at the star-filled sky above Silver Creek, Eleanor couldn't regret a single step that had brought her here. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and the distant howl of a wolf. Winter was coming to Oregon, bringing challenges and changes Eleanor could only begin to imagine. But for perhaps the first time in her life, she faced the future not with resignation or mere hope, but with genuine anticipation. The woman who had stepped off the train in Silver Creek 3 weeks ago had been seeking someone else's approval. The woman who now stood looking at the stars had found something far more valuable, her own strength, and a man who recognized it as clearly as she recognized his. The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity as autumn deepened toward winter. Eleanor worked tirelessly on Gabriel's commission, her days filled with measuring, cutting and stitching heavy wool and canvas into durable winter gear for the logging camp. Her nights were often spent reviewing her ledger, calculating costs and profits with growing satisfaction. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, she felt not just accepted, but essential. Gabriel called on her regularly, their Sunday walks becoming a fixture in both their lives, unlike the stilted conversations that had characterized Eleanor's previous courtships. Their time together flowed naturally. They discussed books, debated politics, and shared stories of their pasts without pretense or performance. Gabriel didn't try to impress her with false gallantry or diminish himself to accommodate her height. Instead, they walked side by side, as equals, an experience so novel that Eleanor sometimes caught herself marveling at the simple pleasure of it. "You're staring again," Gabriel commented one crisp Sunday afternoon as they followed the creek path outside town. Eleanor smiled, unembarrassed at being caught. "I'm still not accustomed to looking someone in the eye without bending my neck." Gabriel chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly in his chest. "My mother would say we're a matched set. She always claimed God makes people in pairs, and some just take longer to find each other." "Your mother sounds wise." She was. A shadow passed over his face. "She passed away when I was 20. Consumption." Eleanor touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry." "It was long ago." He covered her hand with his. "She would have liked you." "Would she?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. "Very much. She had no patience for artifice or pretension, said life was too short to waste time pretending, to be less than you are." His blue eyes met hers. "You never pretend, do you, Eleanor?" "I tried once," she admitted. "In my 20s, I stooped, wore flat shoes, avoided situations where my height would be noticeable." She shook her head at the memory. "It was exhausting and ultimately pointless. I was still too tall, just with a perpetual backache to show for it." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the rushing creek beside them, and the occasional call of a bird overhead. The forest was ablaze with autumn colors, maple and aspen leaves creating a golden canopy against the evergreen backdrop. "I need to return to camp tomorrow," Gabriel said finally. "We have a contract to fulfill before the first heavy snow, and we're behind schedule." Eleanor nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. His visits to town had become more frequent over the past weeks, but she knew his responsibilities at the camp took precedence. "When will you return?" she asked. 2 weeks at least," he replied. "Possibly longer if the weather turns." 2 weeks suddenly seemed an eternity. Eleanor was surprised by the strength of her reaction to the news. "The winter gear should be finished by then," she said, focusing on practicalities. "I've completed nearly 20 sets already." "I wasn't thinking about the commission," Gabriel said quietly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Eleanor felt her heart quicken. "I've become accustomed to our walks," she acknowledged. Gabriel stopped and turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I need to say something before I leave." She waited, watching as he gathered his thoughts. "I came to Oregon 10 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back and an axe. Over my shoulder," he began. Built myself up from logger to foreman to camp manager. Never needed anyone, never wanted to. Eleanor remained silent, sensing he needed to find his way through this declaration at his own pace. Then you stepped off that train and something shifted. His voice deepened. At first, I just admired your dignity when Prescott humiliated you. Then I admired your determination, your skill, your refusal to diminish yourself. He took a deep breath. Now I find myself admiring everything about you. The directness of his confession took her breath away. In Boston, men had couched there, intentions in flowery language and abstract promises. Gabriel offered only truth, unadorned but powerful. I'm not a sophisticated man, he continued. I have rough edges that city life would have smoothed away. But I know my own mind, and my mind is increasingly occupied with thoughts of you. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest, despite the chill in the air. I think of you too, she admitted softly. More than I should, perhaps. Gabriel reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. When I return from camp, I'd like to court you properly. Not just Sunday walks and dinner at the hotel, but with clear intention. His blue eyes held hers. Would you allow that? The question hung between them, weightier than its simple words suggested. Eleanor thought of all the times she'd been passed, over all the men who had found her too tall, too independent, too much. Gabriel offered something she had stopped believing possible, acceptance without condition, admiration without reservation. Yes, she answered, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. I would like that very much. The smile that transformed Gabriel's face was worth any uncertainty the future might hold. Slowly, giving her ample time to withdraw, if she wished, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, brief but filled with promise. When they parted, Eleanor felt a curious sense of homecoming, as if something long unsettled had finally found its place. They continued their walk, hands intertwined, conversation flowing easily once more, but now colored by this new understanding. Between them, at the edge of town, where their paths would diverge, Gabriel stopped again. I nearly forgot, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. I brought you something. He withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with pine branches and birds in flight. I made this, he said, offering it to her. In the evenings after work, Eleanor opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a brooch. Unlike the delicate, ornate pieces fashionable in Boston, this was crafted from polished wood and inlaid with small fragments of shell that caught the light like opals. Gabriel. It's beautiful, she breathed, lifting it from the box. It's Douglas fir, he explained. The shells are from the coast. I thought, he gestured vaguely at her practical dress, I thought it might suit you. Beautiful but strong. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. Will you pin it on for me? His fingers, so capable with an axe yet surprisingly, deft with delicate work, fastened the brooch at her collar. When finished, his hand lingered for a moment against her throat, the warmth of his touch a counterpoint to the cool autumn air. I'll think of you while I'm gone, he said simply. And I you, she replied. They parted with another brief kiss, this one carrying the weight of their coming separation. Eleanor watched Gabriel's tall figure stride away toward the logging company's stables, where he would collect his horse for the journey to the northern camp. Only when he disappeared from view did she turn toward the boarding house, her fingers tracing the contours of the wooden brooch at her collar. Martha was in the kitchen preparing supper when Eleanor returned. One look at Eleanor's face told the older woman all she needed to know. So, Martha said with a knowing smile, it seems you had a pleasant walk. Eleanor touched the brooch self-consciously. Gabriel is returning to camp tomorrow. He'll be gone at least 2 weeks. And he left you with more than just a goodbye, I see. Martha nodded at the wooden pin. That's his handiwork, isn't it? He's always had a gift for carving. Made the chess set the men use at the barber shop. He wants to court me officially. When he returns, Eleanor said. Still somewhat dazed by the afternoon's developments, Martha set down the potato she was peeling and dried her hands on her apron. Well, it's about time he found someone worthy of him. She studied Eleanor's face. And you? Are you certain about this? Gabriel is a good man, but his life is here in Oregon. It's a far cry from Boston society. Boston society never wanted me, Eleanor replied without bitterness. I was always too tall, too outspoken, too independent. She smiled softly. Gabriel doesn't want me despite those things. He wants me because of them. Martha nodded, satisfied. That's as it should be. She returned to her potato peeling. Though not everyone will see it that way. You mean William Prescott, him and others like him. Small minds fear what they don't understand, and two tall people finding happiness together will confound them entirely. Martha's eyes twinkled. I say, let them be confounded. The next morning, Eleanor rose early, drawn to her window by the sound of horses. Below, Gabriel and 3 other men were riding out of town, likely heading to the northern camp. She watched until they disappeared around the bend, carrying the knowledge of their new understanding like a warm coal in her chest. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Eleanor threw herself into completing Gabriel's commission, working from dawn until well after sunset. The repetitive motion of needle through thick fabric allowed her mind to wander, often to memories of Gabriel's kiss and the future it promised. Week into his absence, the first snow fell, light flurries that melted by midday, but served as a reminder of the approaching winter. Eleanor worried about Gabriel and his men working in the increasingly harsh conditions, but she trusted his experience and judgment. On the 10th day, she completed the last set of winter gear for the logging camp. 30 heavy coats, pairs of gloves, scarves, and woolen hats. Each piece was meticulously crafted, reinforced at stress points, and designed to withstand the brutal Oregon winters. The stack of finished work occupied an entire corner of her sewing room, a testament to her skill and dedication. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was organizing her latest shipment of thread when the bell above her shop door jingled. She looked up to see Mary Simmons, or at least a woman she assumed must be Mary, based on Gabriel's description. She was petite and delicately featured, with golden hair arranged in an elaborate style more suited to Portland society than a logging town. Her dress, though practical for the cold weather, was clearly expensive, trimmed with fur at the collar. And cuffs. Miss Morgan, the woman asked, removing her gloves. I'm Mary Simmons, Dr. Phillips's niece. Eleanor straightened to her full height, unable to suppress a flicker of insecurity as she towered over Gabriel's former fiancée. Miss Simmons, what can I do for you? Mary glanced around the small shop, taking in the bolts of fabric and finished garments with an appraising eye. I've returned to Silver Creek to assist my uncle again. His rheumatism makes it difficult for him to travel to outlying homesteads. Her gaze settled on Eleanor. I heard you're a skilled seamstress. I am, Eleanor acknowledged, uncertain where this conversation was heading. I need several dresses altered, Mary continued. Nothing elaborate, but they require a knowledgeable hand. Would you be able to accommodate me? The request was reasonable, normal even, yet Eleanor sensed an undercurrent to the interaction. Was Mary truly here about dresses, or was she curious about the woman rumoured to be Gabriel's new interest? Of course, Eleanor replied professionally. When would you like to bring them by? I have them here. Mary gestured to a valise Eleanor hadn't noticed by the door. If you're not too busy, perhaps you could take measurements now. What followed was a strained half-hour as Eleanor pinned and marked Mary's dresses acutely aware of the stark contrast in their heights and builds. Throughout the process, Mary made polite conversation, asking about Eleanor's background and how she came to Silver Creek. "I understand you originally came to marry William Prescott," Mary commented, as Eleanor measured the hem of a blue silk dress. "Yes," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice neutral. "That arrangement didn't proceed. William can be particular," Mary said delicately, "though I've always found him quite charming." Eleanor continued her work without comment. "I also hear you've become acquainted with Gabriel Blackwood," Mary continued, her tone deliberately casual. "Yes," Eleanor said again, unwilling to elaborate. Mary sighed. "Miss Morgan, I realize this is awkward. I'm not here to create difficulty. In fact, I came partly to warn you." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Warn me?" "About William." Mary's expression turned serious. "He's not taking kindly to your friendship with Gabriel. There's bad blood between those men, as I'm sure you know." "I'm aware of their history," Eleanor acknowledged, thinking of Gabriel's account of finding Mary and William discussing her doubts about the engagement. "Then you should also be aware that William holds grudges," Mary continued. "He's been making comments suggesting Gabriel is only interested in you to spite him, that it's some kind of contest between them." Eleanor felt her face flush with anger. "That's absurd." "Of course it is," Mary agreed readily, "but William believes it, or at least wants others to believe it. He's hurt, and hurt men can be dangerous." Eleanor rose from her kneeling position, once again struck by the height difference between them. "Why are you telling me this? You hardly know me." Mary hesitated. "Because, regardless of what you may have heard, I care deeply for Gabriel. I wasn't ready for the life he offered. Too remote, too rustic for my tastes, but I never wished him harm." She met Eleanor's gaze directly. "He deserves happiness. If you can give him that, then you deserve fair warning about William's resentment." The sincerity in Mary's voice was unexpected. Eleanor had prepared herself to dislike this woman who had hurt Gabriel, but the reality was more complex than she had anticipated. "Thank you for your candor," Eleanor said finally. "The alterations will be ready in 3 days." Mary nodded, preparing to leave. At the door, she paused. "One more thing, Miss Morgan. Gabriel is a good man, but he carries old wounds. Be patient with him." With that, she was gone, leaving Eleanor to ponder the curious interaction. That evening, she recounted the visit to Martha over dinner. "Mary Simmons came to see you," Martha repeated, clearly surprised. "That's unexpected. She swore she'd never set foot in Silver Creek again after she left. She claims she's back to assist her uncle," Eleanor explained. "Dr. Phillips does need the help," Martha acknowledged. "But her timing is curious, returning just as Gabriel has found someone new." "You think she still has feelings for him?" The possibility sent an unexpected pang through Eleanor's chest. Martha considered the question. "Not necessarily, but people often want what they've discarded once someone else values it." She patted Eleanor's hand reassuringly. "Don't fret about Mary Simmons. Gabriel made his choice clear when he kissed you by the creek." Eleanor blushed. "How did you—" "Small town," Martha reminded her with a twinkle in her eye. "Mrs. Henderson was gathering late blackberries and saw you. By supper time, half the town knew." The thought of their private moment being observed and discussed should have mortified Eleanor, but she found she didn't care. Let them talk. For once, the gossip wasn't about her being too tall or too peculiar, but about being wanted and chosen. The second week of Gabriel's absence dragged more slowly than the first. Eleanor filled her days with work, taking on new commissions from townspeople and completing Mary's alterations with professional detachment. The wooden brooch he had given her became a daily fixture at her collar, a tangible reminder of their connection despite the distance. In the morning, Gabriel was expected. To return, heavy clouds gathered over Silver Creek, promising significant snowfall. Eleanor went about her work distractedly, glancing frequently toward the northern road. By midday, fat snowflakes were falling steadily, accumulating on windowsills and rooftops. Martha entered the sewing room, concern etched on her face. The stagecoach driver says the North Road is getting treacherous. The snow is falling faster up in the mountains. Eleanor set down her needle. Do you think Gabriel and his men will delay their return? If they're smart, they will, Martha replied, but Gabriel was determined to be back today. He sent word with the mail carrier yesterday that they'd completed their contract and were preparing to leave at first light. The afternoon grew darker. As the snowstorm intensified, Eleanor tried to focus on her work, but worry gnawed at her. She had heard enough about Oregon winters to know how quickly conditions could deteriorate, how dangerous the mountain passes became when snow obscured the trails. By evening, with no sign of Gabriel and the snow still falling heavily, Eleanor's concern had blossomed into genuine fear. She stood at the window of the boarding-house parlor, straining to see through the swirling white curtain that had enveloped Silver Creek. They'll have made camp, Martha reassured her, bringing a cup of tea. Gabriel's too experienced to push through a storm like this. They'll wait it out and come tomorrow or the next day. Eleanor accepted the tea gratefully. You're right, of course. It's foolish to worry. But as night fell fully and the wind began to howl around the eaves of the boarding house, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Gabriel had promised to return today. In their brief time together, she had come to know him as a man who kept his word, regardless of the cost. She was about to retire for the night when urgent knocking at the front door startled her. Martha hurried to answer it, returning moments later with one of the young loggers from Gabriel's crew, his clothes caked with snow and his expression grim. Miss Morgan, he said, removing his hat. There's been an accident. What happened? Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the sudden chill that gripped her heart. Is Gabriel— He's alive, the young logger interjected quickly, reading the fear in her eyes. But it hurts badly. There was a slide on Raven Ridge. Heavy snow broke loose above the trail. Mr. Blackwood pushed two of the men clear but got uncaught himself. Martha had already sprung into action, grabbing her medical kit from the cabinet. As the widow of a logger, she knew too well the dangers of the profession. How badly is he injured? Eleanor asked, reaching for her coat and boots. Broken. Leg for certain. Maybe ribs too. He was conscious when we got him out, but in rough shape. We've brought him to Doc Phillips. Eleanor was already halfway out the door, Martha close behind her. The snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, the wind whipping it into stinging swirls that bit at any exposed skin. Eleanor barely noticed the cold. Her mind was fixed on a single purpose: reaching Gabriel. The doctor's house stood at the far end of town, its windows glowing warmly against the darkening storm. Eleanor and Martha trudged through snow already knee-deep in places, following the young logger who had come to fetch them. Inside the doctor's house, chaos reigned. 4 snow-covered loggers huddled near the fire, their faces drawn with exhaustion and worry. Dr. Phillips and his niece Mary moved efficiently between the kitchen and a back room, carrying bandages and hot water. "Where is he?" Eleanor asked, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. One of the loggers, a grey-haired man she recognized as Gabriel's second-in-command, stepped forward. "Miss Morgan," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "The boss is in the back room with the doc." "How did it happen?" Martha asked, setting down her medical bag. "We were making good time despite the snow," the older logger explained. "Eager to get back to town. Gabriel was leading. He knows those trails better than anyone." He shook his head. "None of us heard it coming. 1 minute we're riding single file, the next there's a roar like thunder, and half the mountainside is coming down." Eleanor listened intently, trying to picture the scene. "Gabriel spotted it first," another logger added. "Shouted for us to ride hard. But Johnny's horse stumbled, and the boss doubled back." He swallowed hard. "He got Johnny and Be clear, but his own horse panicked, threw him right in the path of the slide. We dug him out as fast as we could, the grey-haired man continued. Found his horse dead, but Gabriel was breathing. He was conscious enough to direct us here rather than trying to make it to the northern camp infirmary. Eleanor's heart clenched. At the image of Gabriel, buried in snow and debris, injured, but still thinking clearly enough to get his men to safety. The door to the back room opened, and Mary Simmons emerged, wiping her hands on a towel stained with blood. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Eleanor. "Miss Morgan," she acknowledged, "I should have guessed you'd come." "How is he?" Eleanor asked, ignoring the curious glances from the loggers. Mary's expression softened. "Stable, for now. The leg is badly broken, a compound fracture that my uncle has set. 3 ribs cracked, extensive bruising, and a nasty gash on his head that needed stitching." She hesitated. "He's been asking for you." The simple statement sent a rush of emotion through Eleanor's chest. "May I see him?" Mary nodded. "Of course. My uncle is finishing the bandaging. I'll tell him you're here." She disappeared back into the room, returning moments later to usher Eleanor inside. The small chamber had been converted to a makeshift surgery, the air heavy with the smells of blood, antiseptic, and sweat. Gabriel lay on a narrow bed, his tall frame barely fitting the space. His right leg was splintered and bandaged, his torso wrapped tightly with clean white strips. His face was pale beneath his beard, a stark contrast to the dark stitches closing a wound above his left eyebrow. Despite his injuries, his eyes were alert, and they found Eleanor immediately as she entered. The relief that washed over his features was unmistakable. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Of course I came," she replied, moving to his side. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, careful to avoid the scraped and bruised knuckles. Dr. Phillips, a thin man with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, nodded to Eleanor. "I've given him something for the pain, but he refused to rest. Until he saw you." "Stubborn," Mary added, but her tone held no malice. "I'll leave you two for a moment," the doctor said, gathering his instruments. "But only a moment, Miss Morgan. He needs rest." Eleanor nodded gratefully, and the doctor and Mary left the room, closing the door behind them. In the sudden quiet, she could hear Gabriel's labored breathing and the howl of the wind outside. "You should have waited out the storm," she said. Softly, squeezing his hand, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I promised I'd be back today." "Not at the cost of your safety," she chided gently. Gabriel's eyes held hers. "I wanted to see you," he said simply. "Thought about you every day I was gone." The raw honesty in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. "I thought about you too," she whispered. He shifted slightly, wincing with the movement. "Doc says the leg will heal, but it'll take time. 6 weeks at least before I can put weight on it." "Then you'll have 6 weeks to rest," Eleanor said firmly. "Can't rest," Gabriel argued weakly. "The camp will manage without you for a while," she finished. "Your men seem quite capable." Gabriel frowned, clearly troubled by the forced inactivity. Ahead of him, "I've never been idle, don't know how to be." "Then it's fortunate you'll have me to teach you," Eleanor said, summoning a smile. "I'm told I can be quite stubborn when necessary." That earned a small chuckle, followed immediately by a grimace of pain. "Stubborn enough to match me, I'd wager." A gentle knock at the door announced the doctor's return. "Time's up for now, Miss Morgan. My patient needs sleep to heal." Eleanor nodded and reluctantly released Gabriel's hand. "I'll return tomorrow," she promised. "Eleanor," Gabriel called as she reached the door. She turned back to him. "Thank you," he said softly. Outside the surgery, the loggers had departed, leaving only Martha waiting in the doctor's front room. Mary was preparing a tray of tea, her movements precise and efficient. "How is he?" Martha asked as Eleanor emerged. "Stubborn," Eleanor replied with a faint smile. "But the doctor seems confident he'll recover." Dr. Phillips had followed her out and now addressed both women. The break is severe, but clean. Provided infection doesn't set in, he should regain full use of the leg eventually. The ribs will mend on their own with time. Where will he stay during his recovery? Martha asked, voicing the practical concern that had just occurred to Eleanor. He can't be moved tonight, the doctor replied. After that, he glanced at his niece. Mary spoke up. We have discussed it. Gabriel can remain here for the initial recovery. We have the space, and medical supervision will be essential in the early days. Eleanor felt a strange twinge at the thought of Gabriel recovering under Mary's care. It was irrational, she knew. Dr. Phillips and his niece were the most qualified to tend to Gabriel's injuries, but still, the idea unsettled her. That's very unkind, she managed, keeping her voice neutral. Mary met her gaze directly. It's the least we can do. Gabriel has done much for this town over the years. The storm continued unabated through the night. Eleanor barely slept, her mind replaying the image of Gabriel's pale face against the pillows, his strong body rendered vulnerable by injury. By morning, Silver Creek was buried under nearly 2 feet of snow, with drifts much deeper against buildings and fences. The town had ground to a halt, streets impassable except on foot. Eleanor forced a path through the snow to the doctor's house shortly after dawn, carrying a basket of fresh bread Martha had baked and several books she thought might help Gabriel, and pass the time during his convalescence. Mary answered the door, looking surprisingly fresh, despite what must have been a long night of patient care. "Miss Morgan," she greeted, "you're early." "I was concerned," Eleanor replied honestly. "How is he this morning?" "Resting more comfortably. The fever we feared hasn't materialized, which is promising." Mary stepped aside to let Eleanor enter. "He's sleeping now, but I'm sure he'll be glad to see you when he wakes." Eleanor followed Mary into the warm kitchen, where she set down her basket. "I brought some books and bread," she explained. "I thought they might be useful." "That's thoughtful," Mary acknowledged, examining the book titles with genuine interest. Classical literature and poetry. Gabriel's favorites, if I recall correctly. The casual reference to her knowledge of Gabriel's reading preferences stung more than Eleanor wanted to admit. Of course Mary would know such things. They had been engaged to be married. "You mentioned yesterday that Gabriel would stay here during his recovery," Eleanor said, changing the subject. "For how long?" Mary poured 2 cups of coffee and offered one to Eleanor. "My uncle believes at least 2 weeks of careful monitoring are necessary. After that, assuming no complications, he could be moved to more comfortable quarters." She studied Eleanor over the rim of her cup. "You're concerned about my involvement in his care." The direct observation caught Eleanor off guard. It's understandable," Mary continued, "given our history. But I assure you, Miss Morgan, my interest is strictly professional. Whatever Gabriel and I shared is long past." Eleanor measured her response carefully. "Forgive me if I seem overly concerned. Gabriel is important to me." "So I've gathered," Mary replied with a small smile. "And you are clearly important to him. He asked for you repeatedly while delirious with pain last night." Before Eleanor could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mary excused herself to answer it, returning moments later with William Prescott. Eleanor stiffened at the sight of him. "Miss Morgan," William greeted her with exaggerated courtesy. "What a surprise to find you here." "Mr. Prescott," she acknowledged coolly, "have you come to check on Gabriel's condition?" A flicker of something, annoyance, discomfort, crossed William's face. "I've come to speak with Dr. Phillips about town matters, but naturally I'm concerned about Mr. Blackwood as well. His accident is most unfortunate." There was something in his tone that rang false, a hollow note in his expressed concern. Eleanor studied him closely, noting the careful neutrality of his expression. "Uncle is checking on his patient," Mary explained. "He'll be available shortly. May I offer you coffee while you wait?" William accepted with practiced charm, settling into a chair with the ease of a frequent visitor. Eleanor wondered how often he called at the doctor's house and whether those visits coincided with Mary's return to Silver Creek. "The storm has caused considerable damage to the eastern storage sheds at the mill," William commented, accepting the coffee Mary offered. "Production will be delayed for at least a week while repairs are made." "A difficult time for such a setback," Mary replied sympathetically. "Indeed," William agreed, "especially with the Portland shipment due this month." His gaze shifted to Eleanor. "And how is your sewing business, Miss Morgan? I imagine there's less call for fancy dressmaking in a town like Silver Creek." The subtle condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Eleanor straightened in her chair, conscious as always of how her height compared to his. "On the contrary," she replied evenly, "I've found no shortage of work. In fact, I recently completed a significant commission for the northern logging camp. Winter. Gear for 30 men. William's smile tightened. "Ah, yes, Gabriel's camp. How convenient for you both." The implication hung in the air, poisonous in its subtlety. Before Eleanor could respond, Dr. Phillips entered the kitchen, looking tired but satisfied. "Good news," he announced. "The patient is awake and showing no signs of infection. The splint is holding nicely, and the ribs seem to be causing less discomfort." Eleanor felt relief wash through her. "May I see him?" Briefly, the doctor agreed. "He's still quite weak." As Eleanor rose to follow the doctor, William spoke again. "Please convey my best wishes for a speedy recovery, Miss Morgan. Silver Creek needs its lumberjacks, after all." The dismissive characterization of Gabriel as a mere lumberjack, rather than the respected camp manager he was, did not escape Eleanor's notice. She nodded stiffly and left the kitchen, following Dr. Phillips to Gabriel's room. Gabriel was propped up slightly against the pillows, his face still pale, but his eyes clearer than they had been the previous night. He smiled when he saw her, the simple expression transforming his features despite the pain evident in the tight lines around his mouth. "You came back," he said, reaching for her hand as she approached the bed. "I said I would," she reminded him gently, taking his offered hand and settling into the chair beside him. Dr. Phillips checked the bandages once more, then excused himself, leaving them alone. Eleanor studied Gabriel's face, noting with concern the dark shadows beneath his eyes and the strain visible in his expression. "How are you really feeling?" she asked. "Like I lost an argument with a mountain," he replied with a weak attempt at humor. "But better than last night." His fingers tightened around hers. "Seeing you helps." The simple admission warmed her. "I brought some books," she said. "I thought they might help pass the time." "Thank you." He shifted slightly, wincing. "I hate being idle." "You're healing, not idle," Eleanor corrected gently. "There's a difference." Gabriel's eyes held hers. "The doctor says I'll be here for weeks. The camp will be fine," she assured him. "Your men are capable, and you've trained them well." He nodded, though worry still creased his brow. "And you? Will you come see me?" "Every day," she promised. "Though I may have to fight through the snow to get here." That earned a smile. The mighty Eleanor Morgan, conquering blizzards. "For you, yes," she said simply. His expression softened. "I meant what I said before I left, about courting you properly." "I should hope so," Eleanor replied with mock severity. "I don't allow just anyone to kiss me by the creek." Gabriel chuckled, then grimaced at the pain the movement caused his ribs. "Perhaps not the most conventional courtship," he admitted. "Me trapped in bed, you trudging through snowdrifts to visit." "When have either of us ever been conventional?" Eleanor asked, smiling. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of conversation from the kitchen and the howl of the wind outside. Gabriel's eyes began to droop, despite his obvious effort to stay awake. "Rest," Eleanor urged, gently disengaging her hand from his. "I'll return tomorrow?" "Promise," he murmured, already half asleep. "I promise," she replied softly. In the kitchen, Eleanor found William still in conversation with Mary, their heads bent close together over what appeared to be town documents. They looked up as she entered, William's expression quickly rearranging itself from intensity to polite inquiry. "How is our patient?" he asked. "Resting," Eleanor replied briefly. "Dr. Phillips seems optimistic about his recovery." "Excellent news," William said with that same hollow enthusiasm. "Mary, perhaps you might consider organizing the Ladies' Aid Society to provide meals during his convalescence. I'm sure Miss Morgan is too busy with her seamstress work to manage such things." The deliberate attempt to separate her from Gabriel's care ignited a spark of anger in Eleanor's chest. Before she could respond, Mary spoke up. "Actually, William, I believe Miss Morgan is quite capable of coordinating any assistance Gabriel might need. She seems to understand his preferences better than most." The subtle support from an unexpected quarter momentarily startled Eleanor. Mary's gaze met hers briefly, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever their history or differences, both women recognized William's manipulative tactics for what they were. William's smile hardened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I merely thought to ease the burden." "Your concern is noted," Eleanor said coolly, "but unnecessary." Outside, the storm had finally begun to abate, the snow falling in gentle flakes rather than driving sheets. Eleanor bid farewell to Mary and the doctor, pointedly ignoring William's offer to escort her back to the boarding house. As she made her way through the snow-covered streets, Eleanor reflected on the curious dynamics she had witnessed. William's interest in Gabriel's misfortune seemed calculated rather than compassionate. Mary's position was more difficult to gauge, professionally detached, yet personally invested in some undefined way. At the boarding house, Martha was waiting with hot tea and questions. Eleanor recounted Gabriel's condition and the doctor's prognosis, her relief evident in every word. "And Mary?" Martha asked perceptively. "How does she factor into all this?" Eleanor considered the question. "I'm not entirely sure. She seems genuine in her desire to help Gabriel recover, but she was engaged to him once," Martha finished, "and old attachments can resurface in times of crisis. Do you think she still cares for him?" The question had been plaguing Eleanor all morning. Martha sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but caring for someone doesn't always mean wanting to be with them. Sometimes it just means wishing them well from a distance." Eleanor nodded, finding comfort in the wisdom. "And William? He arrived while I was there, supposedly to discuss town matters with the doctor. Did he now?" Martha's eyebrows rose. Interesting timing. "He seemed pleased, somehow, about Gabriel's accident." "William Prescott has always resented Gabriel's standing in the community," Martha said grimly. "A man laid low by injury might seem like an opportunity to someone of William's ambitions." The suggestion chilled Eleanor. "You think he would use this situation to his advantage somehow?" "I think William Prescott rarely does anything without calculating how it might benefit him," Martha replied carefully. "Keep your eyes open, dear, and stay close to Gabriel during his recovery." Eleanor nodded, a new sense of resolve settling over her. "I intend to." The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Eleanor divided her time between her sewing work and daily visits to Gabriel, whose recovery progressed slowly but steadily. The infection Dr. Phillips had feared never materialized, and within 10 days, Gabriel was strong enough to sit up for longer periods and even attempt to read the books Eleanor had brought. Mary remained professionally courteous during Eleanor's visits, never intruding on their time together, but always efficiently present when medical attention was needed. William, too, became a regular visitor to the doctor's house, ostensibly to discuss town business, but often lingering to exchange pleasantries with Mary. By the third week, Gabriel's frustration with confinement had reached a breaking point. Eleanor arrived to find him attempting to stand beside the bed, his splinted leg barely touching the floor, his face grey with pain, but set in stubborn determination. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, rushing to support him before he could fall. "Proving I'm not an invalid," he growled through gritted teeth. "You're proving you're a fool," she countered, helping him back onto the bed. "The doctor said 6 weeks minimum before walking." Gabriel's expression was thunderous. "I can't lie here any longer. The camp has sent regular reports," Eleanor reminded him. "Everything is running smoothly." "Too smoothly," Gabriel muttered. "Johnson writes that production is up 15% since I've been gone." Eleanor bit back a smile at his wounded pride. "Perhaps that means you've trained them well." "Or perhaps it means I'm not needed," he replied darkly. Eleanor sat beside him on the bed, taking his hand in hers. "Gabriel Blackwood, you are being ridiculous. Of course you're needed. But right now, what you need is patience." He looked at her, the storm in his eyes gradually subsiding. "I've never been good at waiting." "Then it's fortunate you have me to distract you," she replied lightly. His expression softened, and he reached up to touch her face. "The only good thing about this blasted injury is seeing you every day." The simple declaration warmed her. For all his frustration and impatience, Gabriel had never wavered in his affection for her. Each day he greeted her with the same joy, listened to her accounts of town happenings with genuine interest, and made no attempt to hide how much her visits meant to him. "Dr. Phillips says you might be able to move to more comfortable quarters next week," Eleanor told him, "if your progress continues." Gabriel's eyes lit up at the prospect of escape. "Where?" "Martha has offered a room at the boarding house. The back parlor can be converted to a bedroom temporarily, so you wouldn't need to manage stairs." The offer had been Martha's idea, proposed after witnessing Eleanor's daily trudge through the snow and her increasing concern about Gabriel's restlessness under Mary's efficient but impersonal care. "I'd like that," Gabriel said, his relief evident, "though I wouldn't want to impose on Mrs. Webb." "She suggested it," Eleanor assured him, "and it would make visiting you considerably more convenient." A smile spread across his face. "For entirely selfish reasons, then?" "Entirely," she agreed, returning his smile. Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Dr. Phillips entered, followed by William Prescott. "Ah, Miss Morgan." William greeted her with practiced cordiality. "Devoted as ever to our patients. Recovery?" Eleanor nodded stiffly but didn't reply. "I've just been sharing some news with the doctor that might interest Mr. Blackwood as well," William continued smoothly. "The railroad company has finalized plans to extend the line through Silver Creek to the coast. Construction begins in the spring." Gabriel's interest was immediately piqued. That would significantly reduce transportation costs for the timber. "Operations?" "Indeed," William agreed. "The town council is negotiating terms now. Of course, major decisions about routing and land usage will need to be made." Something in William's tone set off warning bells in Eleanor's mind. He spoke casually, but there was an underlying current of satisfaction that suggested more than simple civic pride in the development. "What land will be affected?" Gabriel asked, clearly thinking along similar lines. William examined his fingernails with studying nonchalance. "Various parcels, some town properties, some outlying areas." He glanced up, "including, I believe, portions of the northern timber tract your camp currently operates in." Eleanor felt Gabriel tense beside her. "That land is under contract to Evergreen Timber," he said flatly. "For harvesting rights, yes," William acknowledged, "but the railroad has eminent domain for construction. The council will be voting next week on which proposal to endorse." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I just thought you should be informed, given your current limitations." The implication was clear. Gabriel's injury had removed him from the decision-making process at a critical moment, and William intended to capitalize on his absence. "I'll attend the council meeting," Gabriel said firmly. Dr. Phillips spoke up, frowning. "You're in no condition to—" "I'll attend," Gabriel repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. William's smile widened slightly. "How admirable. Though, I fear the journey might prove challenging in your condition." "He won't be alone," Eleanor said, meeting William's gaze steadily. "I'll ensure he gets there." William looked between them, something calculating in his expression. "As you wish. The meeting is next Thursday at the town hall. I'm sure it will be most illuminating." After William departed, Dr. Phillips voiced his medical objections to Gabriel attending any public gathering, but it was clear from Gabriel's expression that his mind was made up. When the doctor left to tend to another patient, Gabriel turned to Eleanor. "He's planning something," he said, his voice low with anger. "That railroad extension has been discussed for years, but the timing of this vote, while I'm confined here, is too convenient." Eleanor nodded, sharing his suspicion. "What exactly is at stake with the Northern Timber Tract?" "It's the most valuable stand of old-growth Douglas fir in the region," Gabriel explained. "Some of those trees are 300 years old. The contract gives evergreen timber exclusive harvesting rights for 10 more years, with strict sustainability requirements. I helped negotiate, and the railroad would change that. If they cut through the heart of it, yes, they'd clear-cut a wide swath for the tracks and take the most accessible trees." His jaw tightened. Years of careful forest management destroyed a shortcut to the coast. Eleanor could see how deeply this threatened not just Gabriel's livelihood, but his principles. "Then we'll make sure you're at that meeting," she said firmly. "William Prescott isn't the only one who can influence the town council." Gabriel studied her face, a slow smile spreading across his features, despite the gravity of the situation. "You know, Eleanor Morgan, I believe I'm falling in love with you." The declaration, so casually delivered in the midst of their discussion, stole her breath. She had suspected, hoped, that his feelings ran as deeply as her own, but hearing the words spoken aloud sent a rush of warmth through her chest. "That's fortunate," she replied when she found her voice again, "because I believe I'm already there." His hand found hers, large and warm and steady, despite everything. At that moment, with snow falling gently outside the window and uncertainty looming on the horizon, Eleanor knew with absolute clarity that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, standing tall side by side. The evening of the town council meeting arrived with fresh snowfall blanketing Silver Creek. Gabriel sat propped in a specially modified chair, his splinted leg extended, face pale but determined. 4 loyal loggers had carried him through the snow to the town hall, with Eleanor walking tall beside him, her head held high despite the whispers that followed them. William Prescott stood at the front of the packed hall, his polished appearance a stark contrast to Gabriel's obvious discomfort. The 5 council members, led by Judge Porter, listened attentively as William presented his case for the Northern Railroad route that would cut through the heart of the forest Gabriel managed. "Economic prosperity," William concluded with practiced conviction. "That's what this Northern route promises Silver Creek: jobs, growth, and progress." When Gabriel raised his hand to speak, a hush fell over the crowd. Despite his weakened state, his voice carried powerfully through the hall as he methodically countered William's arguments. He spoke of sustainable forestry, of protecting jobs that would last generations rather than vanish after a single harvest, and of the environmental damage the northern route would cause. "The southern route," Gabriel concluded, "preserves our greatest resource while still embracing progress. Short-term gain shouldn't trump long-term prosperity." To everyone's surprise, Eleanor stood next. Her impressive height commanded attention as she addressed the council. "I came to Silver Creek as a stranger," she began, "but I've grown to love this community and understand its relationship with the surrounding forest." She spoke eloquently about balance, sustainability, and the legacy they would leave for future generations. True progress looks beyond immediate profit to the future we create together. William's face darkened with each word she spoke. When she finished, he rose again. "With all due respect to Miss Morgan," he said with barely concealed contempt, "this decision should be made by those with true investment in Silver Creek's future, not by outsiders or employees with conflicting interests." The dismissive remark sparked murmurs throughout the hall. Judge Porter called for order, and the council withdrew to deliberate. William paced nervously while Gabriel remained still, Eleanor's hand firmly in his. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you spoke the truth." "As did you," he replied, squeezing her hand. "You continue to amaze me, Eleanor Morgan." When Judge Porter finally announced that the council had voted 3-2 in favor of the Southern, a root relief washed over Gabriel's face. William approached them. As the crowd dispersed, his composure restored, but his eyes cold. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "You've managed to delay progress yet again, Blackwood." "I've helped ensure sustainable progress," Gabriel corrected. "There's a difference." William's gaze shifted to Eleanor. "I would have thought you'd have learned your place by now." "My place is exactly where I choose to stand, Mr. Prescott," she replied evenly, "something you never understood." Judge Porter approached after William stormed away. "That was well spoken, both of you." Prescott had the council nearly convinced before tonight. His shrewd eyes assessed them. "Keep an eye on that one. He doesn't take defeat graciously." Back at the boarding house, Gabriel was exhausted but triumphant. Once settled in bed, he reached for Eleanor's hand. "You were magnificent tonight," he said softly, "standing tall in every way." She smiled at his choice of words. "It's easier to stand tall when you have a reason to." "Eleanor," Gabriel began, his voice taking on a serious tone, "there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened at his expression. "Yes?" "When I first met you, you had just been rejected by a man too foolish to see your worth." He took a deep breath. "I love you, not despite your height or your outspokenness, but because of those things. Because you stand tall in a world that would have you stoop." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as he continued. "I had planned to court you properly for months, but tonight reminded me that life offers no guarantees of time." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "When this leg heals, when spring comes to the mountains, would you consider becoming my wife? Not to keep my house or bear my children, though both would be welcome if you desired, but to stand beside me as my equal and my heart's companion." The tears spilled over then, tracing warm paths down Eleanor's cheeks. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady despite her emotion. "I would be honored to stand beside you, Gabriel Blackwood, for all the days we're granted." His face transformed with joy, and he pulled her gently into his embrace. "I never thought," he murmured against her hair, "when I found you at the edge of town that day, that you would change everything." "Nor did I," she replied softly. "When William rejected me, I thought my last chance at happiness had vanished. How wrong I was." The months that followed brought healing and change to Silver Creek. Gabriel's leg mended, though he retained a slight limp that Dr. Phillips warned might be permanent. By March, he had returned to managing the northern camp, implementing new safety protocols inspired by his own accident. Eleanor's sewing business flourished beyond her expectations. Word of her skill spread to neighboring settlements, bringing commissions that allowed her to hire an assistant, a young widow with remarkable aptitude for detailed work. William channeled his thwarted railroad ambitions into expanding his mill, operations, and cultivating political aspirations. Rumors circulated that he intended to run for the territorial legislature in the fall. Mary Simmons remained in Silver Creek, assisting her uncle, and gradually developed an unexpected friendship with Eleanor, bound initially by their shared care for Gabriel, but growing into genuine respect. On a bright April morning, with cherry blossoms drifting like snow in the gentle breeze, Eleanor stood in Martha's garden, wearing a simple cream-colored dress of her own design, unadorned except for the wooden brooch Gabriel had given her months ago. Martha emerged from the house carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. "The Reverend sent word he's ready whenever you are," she said, handing Eleanor the flowers. "No need for haste. It's your day." "Thank you, Martha, for everything. I've watched you grow into yourself these past months," the older woman replied, eyes misting. "See you find your place. It does my heart good." Gabriel appeared at the garden gate, tall and handsome in a new suit, his blue eyes bright with anticipation. He crossed to her, seeming oblivious to everything else. "You are beautiful," he said simply, taking her hands in his. Eleanor smiled up at him, truly up, for Gabriel stood 3 inches taller even now. "As are you, Gabriel Blackwood." "Ready?" he asked softly. "I've been ready since the moment you found me at the edge of town," she replied. As they walked toward the small white church, Eleanor noticed William Prescott watching from across the street. Their eyes met briefly, and Eleanor nodded once in acknowledgement of all that had passed between them, the rejection that had ultimately led her to true happiness. After a moment's hesitation, William returned the nod with a slight tip of his, before turning away. Inside the church, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting rainbow patterns on the wooden pews. The space was filled with faces both familiar and dear. Martha beaming from the front row, Mary sitting beside her uncle, Gabriel's loggers uncomfortable but proud in their Sunday best. When they spoke their vows, Gabriel's voice carried clearly through the church. Eleanor's response matched his in certainty, her promise flowing from a heart that had finally found its home. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Reverend Taylor proclaimed, as Gabriel's lips met hers, sealing their union with a kiss that promised both passion and partnership. Eleanor knew that she stood exactly where she was meant. To be tall and proud beside the man who had seen her true value when others could not. Outside the church, spring sunshine bathed Silver Creek in golden light. For the woman once rejected for being too tall, and the lumberjack who had recognized her perfect match, the future stretched before them like the endless Oregon sky, vast with possibility and beautiful in its unlimited horizon. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.